Climbing down.
When I was coming down a mountain in the Rockies, something made me stop. It wasn't something I saw or something I heard. It was rapid vocalizations coming from below. It wasn't words I recognized, not a bird call. And it wasn't something I could immediately identify, because the moment I heard it, I stopped walking to listen. And just as quickly as it started, it stopped. And the forest went completely quiet. So what happened next is what stayed with me. I became unusually alert, but not frightened. It was just alert. The kind of alertness that can arrive before your mind has a reason for it. And my attention kept pulling towards the same section of terrain below me. So I started looking more closely at where I was standing. When I looked down, I noticed something I had completely missed while walking. A large piece of raw quartz sitting directly on the slope. And that single moment sent me down the investigation loop I was not expecting. When I got home, I started reviewing field notes from other active locations across the Rockies. It was the same terrain profile that kept appearing. And underneath, the same type of ground. It didn't matter locations, reports, or years. It was the same ground. So that raised a question I have not been able to ignore since. Why do some places keep producing reports while thousands of acres around them produce nothing? So that slope was not the first time I had investigated that area, right? It is a location that keeps showing up in my reports and documentation.
Tree's heart, sacred.
And I've seen different witnesses, different seasons, with no connection to each other, and same piece of ground. As I moved through the area that day, the forest felt different before I found anything unusual. And as that trail narrowed, as I came down the slope, springs were emerging out of all areas of that mountain. Everything below me was wet. The moss is thick enough to sink into at least under your foot, like your foot can
the massive tree
be covered with the moss, and holding moisture even where surrounding areas had dried out. So large mature trees stood throughout the area, creating a canopy that could filter the light into scattered beams. And of course our yummy medicinal mushrooms scattered everywhere. The air felt cooler than the forest above. And the noise, the atmosphere was muted. And the only constant sound was the water moving through the springs and the rivers. And then the vocalization, the rapid chatter. Unidentifiable. Gone before I had time to process it. I cannot tell you what made the sound, other than it wasn't like anything physical from my experience. It was just, yeah.
That's what happened to me.
And now I understand why people say, like, when they hear the chatter, the gibber,
Guys, there's mushrooms everywhere.
I'm starting to recognize it as light language in their way of communicating. That's for another episode. And I cannot tell you what made the sound, but again, I can tell you that what happened immediately after the alertness, silence, and the quartz under my foot was what started this investigation.
I'm trying to find the big tree. It's been marked, you guys.
And when I got home, I did something most field investigators skip entirely. I did not start with the sighting reports. I started with the ground, terrain, the geology, because the question that would not leave me was simple. Why here? Why does this specific location keep producing reports and interactions while thousands of acres around it produce nothing? So I pulled the geological and environmental data for the area and for what I knew that was in the area. So the 4 things that appear consistently in the primary activity zones seem to be perennial spring water present year-round, mature old growth forests with decades of established growth, ground conditions that hold moisture, dense moss, saturated soil. I want to be precise about something. I am not saying those 4 things cause the activity. However, what I am saying is that they appeared together consistently at this location. Every time I investigated the active zones and continue to investigate, those characteristics are present. And when I started asking whether this profile was unique to this location, that is where the investigation or the research, the documentation went somewhere I was not expecting, right? I went back through years of field notes, multiple locations across the Rockies, in BC and Alberta, different years and conditions, locations where unusual reports had clustered over time, and something kept emerging from the documentation. The same environment, profile kept appearing underneath the active zones. Not every location, but consistently enough that I could not dismiss it, right? So quartz present in the geology, water moving through the landscape year-round, established mature forest, national parks, grounds that holds moisture in different locations, same profile. At that point, the question changed, you guys. I was no longer asking, why does this hotspot keep producing reports? I started asking, why does this same type of ground keep appearing underneath active locations? And this is why it's a different investigation entirely. And here's the mistake I think most researchers are making. They arrive at a location and immediately look for surface evidence, tracks, sounds, tree structures, visual movement. They document what they find and they leave without ever documenting what produced the conditions for it, right? We want to find the patterns that produce the live interactions and the eyewitness accounts. This is how our experiences can continue to grow with the forest people. So the geology, the water systems, right? The environmental profile, the ground that existed long before these reports started, right? In my experience, the story begins early, way earlier than most investigators think, and it begins with the location itself. And if you're only documenting surface evidence, you are arriving after the story already started and you're not even building the relationship with them, the forest people, right? Their traits suggest I found another location. Minimal environmental destruction. It was in a different region of the Rockies, and different witnesses I had, different history of habitat reports. Destruction. So I pulled the terrain and rare direct confrontation. Profile. Quartz was present. Not there's year-round behavior. Water, mature forest, that is because they were logging it. Regulation, of course. Regulated but nervous system there's still some conditions of the mature forest. It's always going to be under the ground. There was moist ground conditions, lots of rock, same combinations in different location. That was the moment this stopped being a single hotspot investigation. It became a pattern question. One location can be coincidence. However, multiple locations showing the same profile underneath repeated activity, now that demands attention. After I started documenting this terrain pattern on this channel, a viewer reached out. He described a ridge system he had been spending time in, year-round, water running through it, exposed quartz visible along the slope, mature timber throughout, and before finding anything unusual, he wrote, "The area felt occupied the moment I crossed into it," and then he described the sequence. So the location registered differently first. His body went alert before his eyes found a reason. The evidence came after. Different person, different location, same order. And he also pointed to an independent researcher in Europe who had documented and written a book that the same quartz correlation in the soil composition at locations with repeated unusual reports, different country, different context entirely, same terrain, variable. I'm not drawing conclusions from that parallel. However, I am noting that when separate investigations in completely different contexts keep arriving at the same terrain characteristic, so the question is worth asking more systematically, right? So here's what I keep coming back to across all of these locations. It's not just the terrain profile. It is a sequence, a pattern that keeps appearing. And that day coming down the mountain and the talking, chatter, vocalizations that came first with the silence that followed, the alertness arrived before I had reason for it. And then the physical discovery of the quartz under my foot came last, right? So the location registered
were never
before
born
the evidence
disconnected
appeared.
from the earth. You were trained into it.
And I have documented
you were trained
that
by
sequence
noise, screens,
or
stress,
pattern
always being
in multiple
available.
Locations across the
Trained
Rockies.
to live so much
And the
in
people
your
in this
mind
community
that your
apply
body
this
became background noise.
Sorry
And now,
about that.
most people
methodology
can walk into the forest,
and
a living,
slowing down
breathing,
before looking
intelligent
for
system,
evidence. They're paying
and feel
attention
almost
to their own
nothing.
responses and
Not because nothing is there,
documenting what happened in order.
because their body is too loud to perceive it.
And they're reporting back
The
with
earth
the
didn't
same
go
sequence.
silent.
Location first,
The body forgot
responds
how to listen.
second, and then the evidence.
And this is where it gets
appears.
uncomfortable.
So that order
Because what if
repeating
the first
across
sign was
independent
never a footprint?
observers is what keeps this
What if the
investigation
first sign
moving
was
forward.
breeze?
So to be clear about what
Some
I
people
am
can walk through the forest and feel
and
watched.
not claiming
Some people walk through the
is I
forest and
cannot
know
tell you
the whole
what made the
atmosphere just
vocalization
responded.
that day.
And that does not
I
happen
cannot tell
through
you
force.
why the quartz and the
And it
spring
does
water,
not happen by
the
trying
mature
harder
forest,
and pushing.
keep
It
appearing
happens
together
when the body
underneath
becomes
active
quiet
locations.
enough to receive
I mean,
what
eventually
was already
I'll make
there.
a video on a perspective and a pattern.
This is the pattern most
but I
people
cannot
will
tell
miss.
you what the connection
Modern
is.
life floods
yet,
the body with so
or
much
how
stimulation
I'm
that subtle
going about
information
seeing
gets
the
filtered
connection.
out just so
This is
you
why I love
can
this channel
function.
too. And what I can
Constant
tell you is
input,
this.
constant pressure,
After years of personal
constant
investigation
performance,
in the deep, vast wilderness of the
constant
Rockies,
noise.
after
So that
comparing
your
my
body adapts.
documentation,
It stops noticing the small
observations
things,
across multiple locations,
the way you
and after
breath changes
receiving
when you enter
reports
certain
from
places,
you guys in this community,
the way your instincts sharpen
documenting
around
the
certain
same
people,
sequences and
the
having
way your
live
body
interactions
contracts
increase,
before your mind has a
the
reason.
locations producing
The
repeated
way the
reports
forest
over
can
long
suddenly
periods of
feel
time do
still,
not appear to
aware,
be
or
random.
changed. And over
specific
time, the
environmental
living world starts
characteristics
feeling
just
flat.
keep appearing together in these active zones. So the sequence keeps repeating across independent observers. The pattern is real enough to keep investigating and producing results. What it means is still an open question. And open questions are what this channel is built to pursue, right? So here is what I want you to do. If you already spend time in the area with a history of unusual reports, document the place before you document the evidence. Is there year-round water present? How about quartz? Is there visible rock exposed? What about the forest? Is it a mature, established growth? And what about the ground moisture? Then document your body's responses before you look for the physical evidence. What happened first? What do you notice before anything appears? Then document the sequence in order. So come back and comment the pattern. And include, unless you're already seeing the pattern, because I know a lot of you reach out and go, wow, I'm getting live experiences, like not consistently, but it's like building, which I love hearing that this stuff is being used and utilized and producing results for you guys. And include your report in this format. You can go email me or put it on Patreon. Include location type, so the ridge, valley, mountain, terrain, what happened first, body response, visual track, sequence, what came first, second, third, right? So because the more documented sequence we collect, the clearer this pattern can become. And the investigation moves forward one observation at a time. So I went into that mountain in the Rockies, not expecting any kind of investigation. Yes, I did. But I came down, each investigation comes from such different angles and so much more to expand on. So I came down with a question. Why do some places keep producing reports while thousands of acres around them produce nothing? So the investigation is not finished. It's never finished. We love growth. And if you have been in terrain that matches this profile, I need your documented sequence, please. Not your conclusion, not your observation, in order. Subscribe to Deep Woods Discoveries, because we are not collecting stories, we're building a documented pattern. One investigation or one visit to the deep, vast wilderness at a time. So thanks for joining. Feel free to email and or join Patreon to get more one-to-one personal experiences, as we are now going to a Zoom call once a month to build this collective and our research even stronger. Take care. Thanks for joining.